I ran intake on the civilian transport hold for 11 years before the morning they brought him in, and in all that time, I had never once broken protocol. Protocol was the only thing that kept the hold from turning into a slaughterhouse of grief. You process the body, you process the effects, you process the name, and you do not let yourself feel any of it until you're home, with the door locked. He came off the lighter, wrapped in a foil blanket. One of maybe 40 survivors pulled out of a colony ship that had been gutted somewhere past the third ring. The rest of his people had not made it. I knew this because the manifest told me so. In the flat clinical language we used for everything, 91 souls embarked, 1 soul recovered. He didn't speak our trade tongue. He didn't speak much of anything that first hour. He just sat on the intake bench with his knees drawn up, watching the confiscation line the way you'd watch weather coming in. The confiscation line was not cruelty. I want to be clear about that, because from the outside it looked like cruelty. Every personal effect that came off a quarantine transport got cut away, cataloged, and burned. Clothing, bedding, anything porous. Because the spore that had killed his ship's air scrubbers was the kind that nested in fabric and waited. We'd lost 2 intake officers to it the year before I started. So when my partner Devra ran the wand over him and found the coat, she did exactly what she was trained to do. She cut it off him with the short shears, fast, the way you'd pull a tooth, and dropped it into the burn bin without slowing down. He didn't fight her. He didn't even flinch, not really, but his hand came up once, toward the bin, the way a man's hand moves before his head tells it to stop, and then it dropped back into his lap. And he sat there with his arms bare to the recycled air, looking at nothing. I almost let it go. That's the truth of it. I had 40 more people behind him in the line, and a supervisor who clocked every minute I spent on each case. But I'd seen that hand move, and 11 years of intake teaches you to read a hand faster than a face. So before the bin lid sealed, I put my own glove in, and came out with 1 button. It was nothing. A flat disc of tarnished brass, maybe the size of a coin, stamped with a 6-point mark I didn't recognize and didn't need to. It had been sewn on with the kind of thread that doesn't match. Somebody had repaired it once, by hand, in a hurry, with whatever they had. I turned it over in the glove, and the spore wand cleared it in 4 seconds, because brass doesn't host anything alive. I told Devra I was holding it for separate decontamination. She didn't ask why. We both knew the manifest didn't have a line item for 1 button, so neither of us wrote one. I should tell you, I am not a sentimental man. My own father went off-world on a tender 20 years ago, and I have exactly 1 photograph of him, and I do not look at it often, because looking at it doesn't bring anything back. I am telling you this so you understand that what I did next wasn't soft-heartedness. It was arithmetic. The man had lost 90 colonists, a ship, a coat, and every object that had ever touched his life. The line behind him had 39 more people who needed processing before the shift ended. I had 1 free hand and 4 minutes. There's a kind of math you learn on intake that nobody teaches you in the training rooms. You learn it from the body, from watching 10,000 hands move the same half-inch towards something already gone. Most of the time you let the math run, and you don't interfere, because interfering for 1 means you owe it to the next 40, and you can't pay that debt. I had told myself that lesson so many times it had worn smooth, like a coin in a pocket. I still don't fully know why it didn't hold that morning. Maybe the bin lid just hadn't sealed yet. I sat down across from him on the bench. Against procedure, you're not supposed to sit at his level. It's a control thing, and I held the button out flat on my palm so he could see it without my closing my fingers around it like a trick. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that Devra called my name once from the desk and I didn't answer. Then he reached out, slow, the way you reach for something that might not be real, and he took it from my palm with 2 fingers and held it against his chest, over the bare skin where the coat had been, like he was checking it still fit a hole that was there. He said 1 word. I didn't understand it then. I looked it up later, cross-referenced it against the ship's translator logs once they'd been recovered, and it meant, near as the linguists could tell, something between kept and remembered, not thank you, closer to a confirmation, like he was telling himself a fact rather than thanking me for one. I gave him a standard-issue jacket off the rack, gray, shapeless, the kind every survivor gets, and before I sent him through to medical, I did something I'd never done in 11 years, and never did again after. I took the jacket back for 90 seconds, found a needle in the first aid kit, and sewed the button onto the left breast, where his own coat had carried it. It wasn't a good job. I am not a tailor. The thread didn't match, same as the original repair hadn't matched. And somehow that felt right, like the jacket was just the next bad stitch in a line of bad stitches that had been keeping this one thing alive across a span of years I couldn't guess at. He didn't cry, and he didn't say the word again. He just put the jacket on, looked down at the button sitting crooked over his heart, and pressed it flat with his palm once. The way you'd press a bandage to make sure it would hold. Then he stood up and walked through to medical on his own legs, and I went back to the line, and Devra asked if everything was square, and I said it was. And that was the end of it as far as the manifest was concerned. Here is the only part of this I tell people, when I tell it at all. 6 years later, I was running intake on a relief convoy, different hold, different war, and a man came through processing in a uniform I didn't recognize, attached to a delegation that outranked everyone in the building. He stopped at my desk specifically, not the next open window, mine, and he opened his collar 2 buttons down, and there it was, moved again, stitched a third time by hands steadier than mine had been, sitting crooked the same way it always had. He didn't say the old word. He'd learned our language by then, fluently, the kind of fluency that comes from years of using it for things that matter. What he said was that he had kept every uniform he'd ever been issued specifically so the button would have somewhere to go, and that he had come through this convoy, out of his way, on the chance that the man who'd pulled it out of a burn bin might still be sitting behind a desk somewhere in the system, because he had wanted, just once, for someone to see where it had ended up. I told him I remembered the hand that hadn't quite reached the bin in time. He told me that hand had been reaching for the only thing he had left of his mother, who'd sewn it on a coat the first time, years before any of this, on a world that didn't exist anymore in any form he could go back to. We didn't talk long. The line behind him was 30 people deep, and he had a convoy to lead. But he touched the button once before he moved on, the way you'd touch a bruise to confirm it's still tender. And then he went through to wherever delegations go, and I went back to my window, and I have never once, in all the years since, managed to look at a spool of mismatched thread without thinking of him. I never found out what happened to the rest of his uniforms, the ones he wore between that morning and the convoy. I didn't ask, and he didn't volunteer it. Some things don't need the whole record. You only need to know that a thing survived, and that someone carried it on purpose, stitch after mismatched stitch, because his mother's hands had put it there first, and he had decided, somewhere along the way, that this was the one decision he would never hand off to a wand, or a bin, or a protocol again. I still work the intake hold, most days, though the war's changed shape twice since then. Devra retired 4 years back. She sends a card at the new year, and once she wrote, under her name, that she still remembered the button, though she'd never asked what became of it. I never told her about the convoy. Some things you keep for yourself, the way you'd keep a coin in a pocket, worn smooth, from turning it over so many times you've stopped noticing you're doing it. 40 people in a line in 4 minutes are not actually opposed to each other, not if you choose carefully. You just have to be willing to spend the 4 minutes on the one hand that moves before the head can stop it.